Suppose that you work in the Kremlin, and you really want to force 500,000 fresh troops to mobilize to Ukraine. How do you justify that? Well, if you pick up the phone, today's geopolitics helpline proposes a simple solution. Just make it up. Do you think that there is a chance that Russia attempts a false flag operation or deliberately diverts an attack into a sympathetic target, like a hospital or school, to gain support for their narrative and a potential mass mobilization effort? As a starting point, it is incredibly difficult to divert an honest-to-God actual Ukrainian drone or missile into a target as small as a school or a hospital. For comparison, Russia struggles to hit precise targets with its own tech, never mind trying to do the same with hijacked Ukrainian MILF tech. The best that it can do is a broad redirect. So, hit a specific building? No. Go across Russian borders and crash somewhere in a NATO country? Yes. However, the broader point about a false flag is a real possibility. For a historical comparison, there is plenty of speculation that a series of apartment bombings in 1999 were false flags, designed in part to generate political support for a young Vladimir Putin, and in part as justification for a second Chechen war. I need to note that this has become one of those internet facts rather than something that credible sources know to be true. But certainly the precedent of a false flag discussion is there. As a starting point for actual discussion here, I am not sure how effective a false flag portrayed as a Ukrainian attack would be. Maybe I am just poor at lateral thinking, and someone at the FSB has concocted a solution here, but let me draw a comparison. Russia is in a bit of a mess right now. Forget about the refinery attacks. Those are causing strife by limiting supplies of fuel, but average Alexanders can readily understand why a state-affiliated enterprise and the chief source of federal revenues may come under attack. Rather, just look at Wildberries for a moment. The very structure of e-commerce has come under attack inside of Russia. At least 8 civilians have died in those strikes, concentrated in the initial attack. I say at least 8 because it is hard to gather more specific numbers, as Russian officials lump daily casualty figures together, and Ukraine strikes more than just Wildberries facilities during these attack waves. Though it probably says something about how the Kremlin feels about the utility of a false flag attack if it is trying to underplay the damage from bona fide Ukrainian strikes. Along with that, the prevailing public sentiment from Russians post-Wildberries is not one of sympathy for the government. For sellers on the platform, it is anger that their livelihoods have gone up in smoke. For buyers, it is frustration that the special military operation has disrupted their shopping routine. Critically, note that the initial finger-pointing is not toward Ukraine. It is at the Kremlin, though there is a split between the war itself as the problem and the incompetency of the government for failing to prepare the proper air defenses. The main lesson to draw from the Wildberries case is that a simple attack on the Russian homeland will not be enough to trigger a rally round the flag effect. Nor can it just be an attack involving civilian casualties. You would have to set up a false flag where the attack is horrific, causes an abnormally high loss of life, and cannot be readily blamed on Kremlin incompetence. There is recent precedent for a rally round the flag effect involving at least the first 2 components. Remember a couple of years ago back to the concert hall attack outside of Moscow. 151 dead. A clear rally for Putin. Support for the special military operation jumping up, even though Ukraine had nothing to do with it. Still, I would not apply lessons from 2 years ago to today. You may get the same effect, or the exhaustion effect might dominate. There is another lesson here about the false part of the false flag. Part of what made public trust work in Russia was that there was little doubt that the attack was authentic. In fact, the Biden administration had told Russia 15 days beforehand that it had credible intelligence that an attack may be imminent, and the concert hall in particular was cited as one of the potential targets. This was all part of the US duty to warn doctrine, where every potential target, including adversary nations, receive summaries of US intelligence assessments on this front. Side note, can you imagine the political discourse if the same intelligence sharing occurred today? Actually, the Biden-era intelligence community was so good at its job here that the Kremlin had to do some damage control to not appear totally inept to the general public. But the central point still stands. The rally worked because there was public trust that the attack was legitimate. Russia is not North Korea. The average Russian is not completely shielded from international news. The older generation remembers the absurdities of the Soviet Union and has a general distrust of government institutions. They see Putin as someone trying to reform broken systems wherever he can. To the extent that their trust persists today despite a 3-day operation lasting 4.5 years, a strong assumption indeed, a rally round the flag may still work. But the cover story of the false flag needs to be plausible. This is not a case where the dear leader says so, and that is the end of the story. Meanwhile, the younger generation is skeptical of Putin in particular, but tends to be more apolitical. They will be harder to convince, but simultaneously less important to convince. At the start of the invasion, there was another critical intelligence battle here. A separate thing that the Biden administration did on the eve of the war was to spoil the Kremlin's plans to invade. This did not stop Putin from pulling the trigger, but it did influence how third-party countries viewed the narrative that Russia was trying to promote. If US intelligence catches rumors of an upcoming false flag, expect it to get a bunch of play in the media. It has been more than 4 years since those initial warnings, but US signals intelligence coming from the Kremlin seems to have remained strong. And no matter what you think of President Trump, even if you discount how his relationship with Zelensky has changed now that Ukraine has better bargaining leverage, the intelligence community has always favored Kyiv in the war. Given all of these pieces, if I had to guess how the Kremlin might stage a false flag attack, my bet is that Ukraine gets cut out of the picture. Weird, I know, given that Ukraine is actually involved in the war. More likely, the Kremlin would claim that NATO was responsible for the attack. This gets around the incompetency problem by having a small country like Ukraine breaking through your defenses. It also adds novelty to the attack, rather than Ukraine just doing something different. Then Putin will try to thread the needle. NATO is taking advantage of the Kiev regime's perversions to strike us when they think that we are vulnerable. It is therefore critical that we immediately eliminate those fascists occupying New Russia to prevent NATO from exploiting the motherland. The trick here is that you need NATO to be the alleged perpetrator, but you do not actually want to engage NATO and suddenly see all of your supply lines destroyed in 3 hours. So blame NATO, but argue that the solution to the problem is in Kyiv. Now, will that work? I do not know. Is it a good idea? I also do not know, but my skepticism here is mounting. What I can say is that there is a substantial risk that it would backfire for the Kremlin. But if you really need to mobilize 500,000 men to achieve your minimum goals in Ukraine, maybe spinning the wheel is the best thing to do. Meanwhile, why gamble on an unknown video when you could be watching the Geopolitics Helpline archive? Click here to access it. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.